Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be covering Chapter 6, which is called Perception and Managerial Decision Making. This chapter dives into how managers make decisions, plain and simple. So we're going to look at how they make decisions, and these are decisions that could impact an employee, a customer, or even the organization as a whole in some way. So we're going to look at how the brain processes information. We're going to look at the types of decisions that managers have to face every day, some of the barriers and things that get in the way of, decision making, and then techniques to improve decision making. And then finally, we're going to look at group decision making and how that can either help or hinder the outcomes. And so hopefully by the end of the lecture, you'll have more practical strategies that you can apply in real world situations. All right, so the learning objectives for this chapter. First, we're going to describe basically what makes managerial decision making unique and why managers spend so much time making decisions. We're going to explain how our brain processes decisions, and we're going to look at reflective and reactive systems and why they matter to managers. We're going to be able to differentiate between programmed and non-programmed decisions. And then you'll be able to apply strategies to improve your decision-making skills and then understand the pros and cons of decision making. High level looking at managerial decision making, managers, when you're in one of these roles, you're typically in charge of a group of employees, you're typically in charge of some element of the organization. And because of the role that you're in, you constantly have to make lots of decisions every single day. Some things are small, like what do you order for your staff in terms of like office supplies, or which employee is going to cover a shift, things like that. And then other decisions can be a lot more, significant, or you can call them small and big decisions. And some of these bigger decisions could be, do we decide to launch a new product? Do we expand into a new market? Do we open a new storefront somewhere? Those bigger decisions that might cost the organization a little bit more money, or that you have more to risk, more at stake for the organization as a whole. So all of these decisions, like I mentioned, they might impact a customer, might affect the staff. So it generally affects people, but also the organization as a whole. And so that decision making is the action or process of thinking through all the possible options and then selecting one. And to be an effective manager, you really have to balance what it takes to make a good decision. And that could be balancing like the speed of how quickly you make a decision. So you have to make sure that decisions happen on time, but that they're accurate. The decisions have to be, well thought out, and the outcomes have to be as good as possible. And our jobs as managers is to learn how to create that process within ourselves so that when we are put in those situations, we're able to make the decisions and take all of these, steps to make sure that you're making the decision that has the best possible outcome. But you want to really get to a point where you can do it kind of like on demand and quickly, that is appropriate for the decision that you're making. But it takes practice and it takes experience and it takes really ingraining this decision-making process within yourself. So we're going to look at how these managers navigate these choices. So again, managers make decisions all day, every day, big and small, and the decisions can affect employees, customers, or the whole organization. And being an effective decision maker requires balancing that speed with the accuracy of the decision, making sure that you're making the decision that has the best possible outcome. So let's look at now how our brain processes information. Psychologists identify two systems that our brain uses to make decisions. The first is a reflective system, the second is a reactive system. So let's start with the reflective system. This is a slow, deliberate, and analytical process of thinking. And this is what managers use when they're making more complex decisions, like deciding whether they're going to launch a new product or deciding whether they're going to expand into a new market or evaluating a marketing strategy, those kinds of decisions. They're slower. It requires really a lot of analytical thinking. And then you have the reactive system, and this is a system that is fast. It's like auto, it really relies on something called heuristics, which is kind of like a mental shortcut, something that allows you to automate your decision making. With reactive systems, it requires us to make these decisions quickly. And typically it's with familiar situations, like something we've done before, like what is the fastest way to get home, right? You've done it many times. You already know the drill, you know what to do, and you can quickly make that decision. Think about when you're buying something, maybe you're deciding to buy groceries, you already know typically what groceries you buy, what decisions you make when you're in front of the products themselves. And so we have these mental shortcuts that we've already made these decisions. We know that there's not a lot at stake. It's an easy automatic response. And so those decisions are more reactive because they require less of that analytical thinking. So understanding these two systems helps managers know when they need to slow down and when they kind of go into that autopilot mode when they're making decisions. And think about it, every time you make a decision, you're using your brain power. So if you're deciding on whether ordering post-it notes or not, like, you don't want to spend too much of your thinking power on that. You want to save it for the decisions that really matter. If you have a system in place and you're able to recognize as a manager, okay, this is a decision that I don't need to sit here and deliberate, and it should be something fast. I don't need to be sitting here doing some serious analytical thinking about this. Understanding these systems helps us make quick decisions in familiar situations quickly, and it helps us understand when we need to slow down and think more critically in order to make a more well-informed decision. And sometimes these, especially with the reactive system, there is an element of emotion involved. And so there's something called emotional intelligence. So emotions and being aware of our emotions is really important in the decision-making process because sometimes you do make decisions that bring in the emotions into your thoughts, and you have to be able to kind of like navigate those thoughts and understand the role that emotions should play. So being aware of the role emotions play in decision making doesn't mean that we should ignore them, because emotions can be powerful signals about what we should do, especially when we're dealing with ethical situations. And so you want to be able to navigate this, something we call emotional intelligence. And this is a big thing that has, I would say in the more recent past, and in the future, it's also looking like it's still something that managers and people really focus on. And emotional intelligence is the ability to recognize, understand, and manage our own emotions. It's the ability to perceive and respond to others' emotions, to balance emotion and logic to make effective decisions. So it requires this like self-awareness, self-regulation, but also empathy and social skills. And so this is something that it's just a really good concept to understand. So if you've never heard of it, I really encourage you to take some time to research it a little bit, understand what it means, and think about yourself and assess whether you feel like you have this strong emotional intelligence. It's something that is constantly, highlighted as something that people are looking for in their employees. And it's just being able to kind of read the room, understand the dynamics of what's happening, and kind of like taking those emotions of what you're feeling, of all these different things that you're considering, and being able to be self-aware, self-regulate your emotions, have like the social skills to understand what others' emotions are, and then having that empathy. So it's like I said, recognize, understand, and manage your emotions, perceive and respond to others' emotions, and then balancing emotion and logic to make those effective decisions. So it really involves self-awareness and self-regulation. And this is something that I think a lot of people lack, that and this is from reading about it. Sometimes people can't read the room, can't, understand maybe that others are upset about something or that others are bringing in emotions into the conversation or into this decision and whatnot. And so that's why it's really important to know how to detect whether someone has strong emotional intelligence or not. So definitely encourage you to read more about it if it isn't something that you are familiar with. The book does touch on it, but I encourage you to do even more, just Google searches, research. There's tons of articles out there on it, and there's even books about it. So just kind of goes to show how it is something that is very much in high demand in a work setting. So let's jump now into programmed and non-programmed decisions. There's two types of decisions that managers face. Programmed decisions are routine and they have established procedures. So we've talked about this back in this slide. Reactive system and reflective system. So this would be kind of like that quick one. But these program decisions are routine and you have procedures in place for them. So, and giving the example again of reordering office supplies when inventory is low. So, when inventory starts dropping, okay, I have to order some new supplies. These are familiar decisions where rules and guidelines already exist, and program decisions are we go back to the heuristics or mental shortcuts. So managers develop these shortcuts because they don't want to waste that, thinking power on these decisions. And also it creates a situation where if the manager wants to delegate, they can because it's already something that they know it's just what we do. Supplies are low, you order. Managers can set procedures in place to make their lives easier when it comes to these decisions, and then they no longer have to spend any energy or mental capacity on considering, oh, do we need to order supplies? This is a system when the supplies get below this level, we order. And so that one, again, becomes routine. There's rules in place and often requires very low involvement on their part. And that's kind of the sweet spot you want to be in because you want to save your time and energy for other more managerial decisions. And sometimes they'll take a lot of the energy and time of the managers. So being able to create more of these program decisions when possible is really something that should be prioritized. For non-program decisions, and these are unique and unstructured typically, and let's say that a manager is deciding whether to adopt a new technology or if they want to enter a new market. These types of decisions require judgment, critical thinking. They really have to bring out the analytical skills here. This is where there's more at stake, more time needs to be dedicated to the decision because there's more risk. Maybe it would be a big investment for the company, and if it doesn't go well, the manager might get fired, the company might suffer significantly. Those are the kinds of things that, really require the manager to set aside and slow down, think through things, bring out the different considerations. And so these require much more involvement. So to kind of show the difference between the programmed and non-programmed decisions, the book has this chart. This is Exhibit 6.3 from our textbook. And you can see here we have high involvement and low involvement decisions. And going back to this slide briefly, you can see programmed decisions are low involvement. Those are the quick ones that are already kind of set in stone. There's rules for them. You just kind of, again, supplies run low below this level, you order new ones. And then there's the non-programmed decisions, which are high involvement. And so this chart kind of gives examples here. So there is a high involvement decision, rare purchases such as a house or who to hire for an important position, more complex decisions, more costly decisions, more time invested in making the decision. So these all are traits of the high involvement decisions. And then you have low involvement decisions. These items are purchased more frequently, like pack of gum, ordering office supplies. Less complex decisions, less costly decisions. Time does not need necessarily to be invested in making this decision because it is more routine. So just to kind of highlight some of the characteristics of high involvement and low involvement decisions. Now let's talk about the decision-making process. While decision makers can often rely on the mental shortcuts or the heuristics for the program decisions, for non-program decisions, they require a more systematic approach. And this process can be broken down into 6 steps. So, number one, you want to recognize that a decision needs to be made. So, first, identify that there's a problem or an opportunity that requires some action. Then, you generate multiple alternatives. So, what are the possible options for deciding? And then you analyze the alternatives. So, you weigh what are the pros and cons of each choice. And then you select one of those alternatives. So, you choose the option that seems best based on your analysis of these pros and cons. And then you implement the selected alternative. So it puts your decision into action. And then you evaluate its effectiveness. After you make the decision, you want to make sure to review the results and learn from that outcome. And that's really going to guide your, you know, your decision-making skills. It's going to build them because you will learn every single time if you actually go through this process and evaluate at the end that will tell you, how did you do in this decision-making process? Did you, let's say that the decision-making process goes wrong and you make a choice that might not be considered the best possible outcome. So how can you go back and learn from this experience? Maybe you learned that there's some step along the way that you could have done better. Maybe in generating the multiple alternatives, you only had a limited amount, or maybe there's the analysis, maybe you missed some pros and cons. You can go back and kind of go through and identify areas where you can improve. And in the future, that really just makes you a better decision maker because you can now, you will have learned from a potential mistake or a potential challenge area, and you improve it as you continue building that experience. And experience really does play such a significant role. When you've been a manager for many years, that really shows in how you make those decisions. So they seem straightforward, Of course, we're going to recognize we need to make a decision. We're going to come up with alternatives and then assess the alternatives, pick one, implement, evaluate. It seems pretty straightforward. But when you actually put this into practice, a lot of us sometimes skip steps and we're maybe rushing through it. Maybe we don't generate alternatives. Maybe we just kind of jump into selecting an alternative. Whatever it is, we tend to miss something in this process. And that's why being aware of this process and learning how to kind of do the checklist within our own minds is really something that saves you and builds that decision making kind of mentality, the skill set. And as you go through it, like I said, you build that experience, but we sometimes don't think of it in this step-by-step process. We just kind of think, oh, decision, I'm going to do this. All right. And then we move on. And maybe we don't ever take the time to evaluate our decision. So there is, I encourage you to think of a decision that you recently made, maybe a big decision, and kind of go through these steps and think, did I do this? Did I do this? And what part didn't I do? And why how could that step have helped me make a better decision, or help me improve my decision-making skills. Whatever that is, make sure to spend some time reflecting on your own process that you typically use to make these, more programmed decisions. And try and next time you have to make a decision to maybe go through this process and see maybe you tend to skip a step or rush through them. So whatever it is, identify it and as you become a manager and grow your decision making and management skills, you'll see that it is important, especially in the workplace, to go through all of these steps and learn from them and always continue to improving upon, your decision-making skills. So this is the chart from our textbook. And again, it just kind of goes through the 6 steps: recognize the decision needs to be made, generating alternatives, analyzing the alternatives. And this one actually in the book, it goes a little bit more in detail, like conducting research, engaging in evidence-based decision making. And then step 4, selecting the best option, implementing, the selected alternative, and then evaluating its effectiveness. So this is a chart that's in our book that just really is another version of this one. So what are some barriers that get in the way of us making good decisions? So even experienced managers have these barriers. I just want to say that it doesn't matter if you're a new manager or you've been, working as a manager for many years, there's always barriers that we face, and they can make decision making challenging for us. So Let's start by going through each of these. So first is bounded rationality, and it means that managers have limited information, limited time, and limited mental capacity to process everything. So we're bounded. Um, and then there's escalation of commitment, and this typically happens when someone sticks to a bad decision, even when the evidence shows that it isn't working, but they're just, stuck on this decision. Maybe they're embarrassed, maybe they're just stubborn, whatever the case may be. They've already kind of, the evidence is showing this is not working, but they keep at it. Then there's time constraints. Often, time constraints force managers to make decisions very quickly. And sometimes that very quickly turns into missing some steps. You sacrifice quality, and it ends up being maybe it's not the best decision, or it's a decision that doesn't lead to the best possible outcome. Then there's uncertainty. Uncertainty makes outcomes unpredictable. You don't know, the outcomes are unknown. Um, and then there's personal biases. So preferring people similar to ourselves, that can cloud your judgment. And then there's conflict, and this can be both a barrier and a tool. A little conflict can improve decisions, but by introducing different perspectives, that can help maybe lead to a better solution. But too much conflict can derail progress and really delay decision making. So these are some of the common barriers to effective decision making. So how do we improve the decision making process? So there are some strategies for program decisions. The best is, basically creating those mental shortcuts to make decisions quickly. Routine for routine decisions. You don't need to go in there and go through this six-step process. You already kind of know the drill, what to do. So heuristics, those mental shortcuts, and then satisficing, which means choosing the first solution that meets the minimum requirements, like picking the first grocery item that fits your budget when you're in a hurry. And then there's for the six-step process is for the non-program decisions, the ones that require you to slow down. And so for these non-program decisions, managers have to follow this six-step process, which is recognizing the need for a decision, generating alternatives, analyzing alternatives, selecting an alternative, implementing the alternative, and then evaluating the effectiveness. And then, of course, considering ethical implications and critical thinking. So this is a table that's in our textbook that just has a summary of the techniques that may improve individual decision making. So you see there's a type of decision on the left, the technique and the benefits. So you can see for program decisions, we have heuristics, which is creating those mental shortcuts. And then we have satisficing, which is choosing the first acceptable solution. The benefit of these is that it saves time. And those are for the program decisions. So you can see that's the key. For non-program decisions, we have this list, which is basically to systematically go through the six steps of the decision-making process because that will improve the quality of the decision. Talking to other people because that improves quality, generates more options, reduces bias because you have different perspectives. Be creative, improves quality, generates more options. Conducting research, engaging in evidence-based decision-making, that also improves quality. Engage in critical thinking, think about long-term implications, and consider ethical implications. So all of these are designed to improve the quality for those non-program decisions. So see, these are some of those techniques that you can implement to make better decisions. So the last big piece of this chapter is something that we kind of touched on in the last chapter, which is group decision making. And we talk a lot about bringing people from different backgrounds, different perspectives together, because it really enriches the ideas. There's more creativity that is sparked because you have different perspectives coming. Everyone looks at the world differently. Everyone looks at situations differently. They have different approaches. Our problem-solving skills are also different, that they could potentially lead to more alternatives to consider, which ultimately leads to a better quality decision. And so group decision making, is basically bringing all those people together from diverse perspectives to make decisions. And it has additional benefits, that are great for the process, but it also brings challenges. So on one side, you have the advantages, which is that you're bringing multiple perspectives and knowledge together. and more options are generated as a result, and you just have a greater commitment to the decisions. So, for example, you have a hiring committee, and if you have both men and women on the committee, they're less likely to be biased. And on the downside, if the groups have conflict, they can get stuck in that conflict, which ultimately delays their decision making. And they could also fall into groupthink when members stay silent or maintain harmony, because they just want to agree with their group. And maybe they all think the same. I don't know. Maybe they just all kind of want to follow along with the leader of the group. And then there's suppression of dissent, where one powerful member dominates the conversation or the ideas. And so the way that you are able as a manager to facilitate basically taking advantage of all of the positives that can come from decision making as a group, but navigating the disadvantages to minimize those and to really get the most benefit from group decision making, managers really have to navigate and create processes that basically allow for groups to be able to work together successfully and come up with these decisions without necessarily having to deal with the conflict, the groupthink, or having one powerful member dominate the conversation. So managers can improve group decision making by creating very diverse groups and then facilitating and encouraging everyone to speak up so that those ideas and multiple perspectives and knowledge is brought to the table. And then they can also assign a devil's advocate to challenge ideas, and then helping the group find common ground when conflict arises. So, as a manager, you can leverage group decision making by staying on top of it and making sure that you're creating a space where these decisions and these perspectives and knowledges can be brought together. Um, and you can facilitate the process to help the group make well-formed decision. So key takeaways from this chapter: decision making is central. It's at the heart of effective management, and to a manager's success, it is really something that drives that success. And managers can improve their decisions by recognizing personal and organizational biases, following systematic processes, considering ethical implications, and involving others when appropriate. Expertise develops over time, but applying these strategies consistently can help managers achieve better outcomes for their organizations and their teams. So as you continue your studies and following a career in management, think about how you can practice these techniques in everyday situations, whether you're working on a group project or internships or even in your personal decisions. The more you practice this process and the more aware you are of the types of decisions that you're making, the better manager you will become over time, because you're practicing the management skills and really just especially for those of you that are already managers, you're really kind of challenging yourself to apply have like that different managerial perspective as you approach decision making. So you're either building those managerial decision making skills, or you are perfecting them and improving them and building upon what you already know and what you already do in your job. So that is it, and I hope that you enjoy all the other videos that I have added in this week's videos page.